The first time I saw the old Orpheum Theatre, its faded marquee flickering dimly above the shuttered box office, I didn't think haunted. I thought abandoned. Dust streaked the gilded lettering, and the once grand facade had crumbled into flaking stucco and rusting iron. But the building was still standing, and someone had deemed it worth guarding. I was hired through a temp agency, a security contractor that fed night shift workers into forgotten places no one else wanted to touch. My supervisor, a woman named Clarice, who seemed always on the edge of quitting, handed me a manila envelope without ceremony. "You do your rounds, follow the rules, and clock out at dawn," she said. The usual work of a night shift security guard. But it didn't feel easy, standing alone in the echoing foyer, my boots crunching over old ticket stubs and something that might have been bird bones. The darkness seemed thick, congealed, in the high corners of the lobby. A heavy velvet curtain separated the lobby from the main theater, and just looking at it made the hairs on my arms lift. The envelope contained the keys, a faded map of the premises, a flashlight with half-dead batteries, and a handwritten note, smudged with fingerprints and time. It was titled in blocky capitals, "Rules for the Night Shift, Orpheum Theatre. Rule 1. At midnight, the backstage light will turn on by itself. You must be in the main lobby when it does. Do not attempt to enter the stage before 12:05 a.m. Rule 2. If you hear piano music coming from the orchestra pit, do not investigate. Rule 3. A woman in a white dress may appear in the balcony. Do not acknowledge her. Keep your eyes on the stage. Rule 4. If a man in a top hat asks for your ticket, show him your empty palm. Then walk away. Rule 5. Do not, under any circumstances, enter dressing room 3. Rule 6. If the stage lights turn on after 3 a.m., applaud until they turn off. Rule 7. You may see a girl wearing a crying mask. Act out her favorite scene from a theater play with her. If she likes it, she will help you escape. Rule 8. At exactly 4:44 a.m., the curtain will rise. Do not look at what's on stage. Rule 9. When the sun begins to rise, return the keys to the box office. Leave the building without turning around. The last rule had been added hastily in a different hand, scrawled at an angle in smeared red ink. Rule 10. If the audience starts clapping, it's already too late. I read the list 3 times. I assumed it was a joke, a bit of theatrical flourish to mess with the new guy. But something about the rules gnawed at the edges of my mind, especially the last one. The idea of an audience still lingering here, long after the final curtain fell. At 11:59 p.m., I finished my first walkthrough of the lower level. The foyer, the box office, and the narrow hallway that led to the dressing rooms. Most were empty. Dressing room 3 was locked, thankfully. A brittle scent lingered near it, like dried flowers and rotting paper. 1 minute later, just as the second hand completed its circle, a dim orange light flickered on in the backstage corridor. No switch flipped, no hum of fluorescent tubes, just a sudden silent illumination, glowing like the flame of a candle behind thin glass. I was where I should be, in the lobby, facing the stage. And yet, the sight of that light, abnormal in its stillness, made me hold the flashlight tighter, knuckles whitening. Something had changed. The theater felt less like a forgotten relic, more like a breathing thing, stirring to life for the night's performance. And I had just taken my seat. The Orpheum always had a strange atmosphere even during the day, but at night, the silence turned into something else entirely. Something disturbing, almost watchful. I spent the early part of the shift going through my usual patrol, checking the lobby doors, confirming the emergency exits were locked, glancing at the rows of velvet-covered seats that stretched into the dark like a sleeping audience. Everything was ordinary as it should be, until the antique clock in the lobby clicked softly to midnight. It was so subtle I almost didn't register it. But then, a faint hum drifted through the air, low and electrical. My stomach tightened. I turned toward the hallway that led to backstage, and sure enough, I saw the dull amber glow spilling beneath the doorway. The backstage light had turned on. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. The rule was clear. At midnight, The backstage light will turn on by itself. You must be in the main lobby when it does. Do not attempt to enter the stage before 12:05 a.m. I had read that rule at least a dozen times earlier in the night. I thought it was nonsense then, a bit of theatrical superstition. Some disgruntled ex-employee had scribbled to mess with the new guy. But now, with that warm light humming in a part of the building I hadn't touched, I didn't feel like testing fate. So I remained anchored to the center of the lobby, between the marble pillars, my eyes fixed on the hallway's end. My flashlight hung in my hand, the beam pointed downward, useless against the unnatural glow that leaked from behind the door. The theater creaked, not loudly, just the way old wood does when something moves past it, even though no one should be moving at all. I counted the minutes in my head. 5 long, agonizing minutes. At some point, I found myself rubbing the scar just beneath my collarbone. An old military habit. Stay calm, stay put and observe. Something moved behind the glass doors, leading to the auditorium. I turned too quickly. The stage was still dark, the crimson curtain heavy with dust and age. But I was certain, absolutely certain, that just for a moment, I had seen a dark silhouette, as if someone were standing dead center beneath the proscenium arch. No detail, just the suggestion of a presence. The backstage light flickered once. Then, as though a switch had been thrown elsewhere, it went dark. I checked the time. 12:05 a.m. exactly. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave, walk right out, and never come back. But another part, the part trained to follow through, to finish the job, clenched my jaw and took a breath. Time to patrol the stage. I made my way to the side door that led to the wings. The air changed as soon as I stepped through. It was warmer somehow, and carried a slight scent of grease paint and old moldering wood. A draft whispered past my ear, bringing with it a single sound. The slow, deliberate squeak of something large being moved across a wooden floor. There was no one there. The backstage was empty, but a faint set of footprints had appeared on the dust-caked floorboards, leading from the curtain to the center of the stage. Not to the wings where I stood or to the trapdoor below. Just from the curtain to center stage, and then nowhere. I traced them with the beam of my flashlight, but when I looked up, I froze. A chair, a simple wooden theater chair, ornate and faded, now sat alone at the edge of the stage. It hadn't been there before, and somehow I knew that it was facing me. I kept my distance from the stage, not out of cowardice but caution, the kind honed over years in places far more dangerous than an empty auditorium. Still, something about that solitary chair, now sitting in quiet defiance at center stage, made the hair on the back of my neck rise in a way I hadn't felt since Afghanistan. I moved back into the wings, taking a wide arc toward the house right entrance, avoiding the footprint trail. The auditorium stretched before me again. Velvet seats swallowed in darkness, gilded balconies peering down like judgmental eyes, and the shadowed maw of the orchestra pit, yawning just below the stage. I made a note to check the chair again later. If it was some kind of prank, I'd want to see if it moved. But as I stood there, beneath the ghostly hush of the chandelier high above, a sound began to echo through the cavernous space. An uncertain strike of a piano key. I stopped mid-step. Another note followed, slightly higher in pitch, this time with more confidence. Then another. Then a short, halting sequence, like someone trying to remember a tune long forgotten. It was coming from the orchestra pit. At first, I told myself it could be a recording. A weird old sound test, maybe accidentally left playing in the control room. But I knew better. The acoustics in the Orpheum were exquisite. So perfect, in fact, that you could tell exactly where a noise originated. And these notes weren't coming from a speaker. They were being played. I didn't need to be reminded of Rule 2. I backed up slowly, never taking my eyes off the edge of the pit, where the emergency lights just barely revealed the outline of the conductor's stand and the curved lip of the platform. But then something moved. A hand, white as parchment and impossibly long-fingered, rose into view, its shape flickering as though seen through water. It rested lightly on the piano's surface, emerging from a sleeve too tattered to belong to any modern costume. Then, A second hand followed, hovering just above the keys. And the melody began. It was beautiful. Haunting, slow, filled with aching sadness that sank into my chest. Like the memory of someone I never knew, but missed all the same. I stood there, dug in, half lost in the music, until I felt the subtle pull, as if my feet wanted to move forward despite every instinct screaming otherwise. No, I tore my gaze away and stepped back hard, nearly tripping over the base of a column. The music stopped. I didn't look again. I consciously made my way down the side aisle, back to the lobby. I kept my eyes on the exit sign above the main doors and refused to let them drift left, where the pit sat like a mouth that hadn't finished speaking. Behind me, the keys struck once more, just a single dissonant chord, as if whatever had been playing now knew I was leaving, and didn't like it. I forced myself to complete my patrol, looping through the mezzanine hallway and upper box seats. The theater creaked as if shifting in its sleep. Every step echoed too loudly. Every shadow threatened to become a silhouette. But there was no music, no white hands, no chair on the stage when I checked again. I breathed easier. By 1:38 a.m., the theater had settled into that ineffable silence, peculiar to places built for noise. In the lobby, the ticking of the antique clock above the concession stand filled the air, like a metronome for some unseen performance, its hands crawling ever closer to some invisible cue. I sat briefly on the old usher's bench in the east corridor, checking the logbook again. Not for changes, but for comfort. There was something reassuring about ink and paper, about tangible things I could hold, even as everything around me began to feel less solid by the minute. My radio crackled once, then silence. Just that brief flicker of presence, and the sudden hollow absence that followed it. I made my way back into the main auditorium, deciding to conduct a second sweep of the upper levels. Something about the mezzanine unsettled me less than the ground floor, as if being closer to the ceiling and farther from the stage gave me some small advantage. Though I couldn't have said why. I climbed the narrow staircase tucked behind the ticket-taker's alcove, my flashlight sweeping the faded burgundy carpeting and dust-lined railings. The balcony unfolded before me like a quiet cathedral. Rows of empty seats lined up in silence, watching a stage gone dark. And that's when I saw her. She stood near the far corner of the balcony, motionless, backlit by the dim glow of an emergency light. Her white dress hung still, untouched by any breeze, and her hair fell like a dark curtain over one shoulder. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the stage. I froze halfway across the balcony. Her presence was impossible to ignore, but that was precisely the point, wasn't it? Everything about her was designed to draw the eye. The uncanny stillness, the way her figure blurred slightly at the edges, like fog caught in motion. And in that moment, I understood. Looking at her, truly seeing her, would be a kind of invitation. So I turned my gaze away. I let my eyes fall to the stage below, where the lone chair had returned once more to center, as if it had never left. I stood like that for a long time, breathing evenly, eyes forward, heart thudding in my chest like a trapped moth, until I heard movement, the delicate sound of fabric brushing against upholstery. I didn't look. I couldn't. She was walking the aisle behind me. I heard each soft rustle as she descended, moving carefully, gently, as if she were taking her seat for a show long since finished. When the sound stopped, something changed in the atmosphere around me. An almost imperceptible pressure, like being watched through glass, or standing too close to an aquarium tank with something large moving just out of sight. Eventually, the silence resumed. The sensation passed. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the chair far below. When I reached the staircase, I descended without turning around once. Each step down a reminder of the rule's simplicity and its cost had I failed. Only when I returned to the lobby did I allow myself a breath. Behind me, the theater remained silent. I felt she was still there, and next time she might not let me look away. By 2:12 a.m., the shadows grew longer in places where the lights had not dimmed, and the ambient creaks and groans of the old building began to fall into unsettling patterns. Like footsteps where no one walked, like whispered phrases never quite intelligible. I had returned to the main lobby, hoping the familiar surroundings might offer some fragile sense of stability. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized the theater was growing aware of me. Or worse, interested. The velvet ropes at the entrance to the aisles had shifted slightly, as though someone had passed through them. The air had cooled, just subtly enough that I could see the fog of my breath hang in front of me like smoke. Suddenly, there was a soft, gravelly cough behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd find. He stood just inside the main entrance, tall and lean, his face mostly shadowed beneath the brim of a glossy black top hat. His coat looked like something from another century. Worn but elegant, the collar slightly upturned, the buttons dulled with time. One gloved hand rested on a polished cane. The other extended forward, palm up, waiting. His voice, when it came, was low and polite, but layered with a strange undertone, like someone mimicking speech after years of silence. "Your ticket, please." There was something oddly courteous about him, which made it worse. As if underneath the civility, there was something ancient and starved wearing a gentleman's form. I raised my hand slowly, letting my empty palm face him. For a long second, he didn't move. His head tilted just slightly, and I saw the gleam of his eyes from beneath the shadow of the hat. Two black spaces, as though someone had forgotten to finish the face. Then, without a word, he lowered his hand. I went away, not hurriedly, not frantically, just calmly, like a man who had shown his ticket and been waved along. I moved through the red-carpeted hallway beside the auditorium, my footsteps muffled by age and dust. Back in the security room, I closed the door gently and watched the monitors. For several minutes, all was normal. Then, on camera 2, the wide-angle shot of the lobby. He stood at the foot of the grand staircase, facing the camera directly now, his hat casting a perfect crescent of shadow across his face. He raised one gloved hand and tipped the brim, as if to say, "Well done." And then he was gone, just the static flicker of an empty frame where he had been. I let out a slow, trembling breath and checked my watch. 2:23 a.m. Another rule survived. But my intuition told me the Orpheum was only beginning its performance. The quiet didn't last long. By 2:58 a.m., I was making my second sweep of the hallway leading to the dressing rooms. A narrow corridor lined with peeling wallpaper and old theatrical posters, most of them curled at the corners and stained with watermarks. The scent back there was different from the rest of the theater. Not the expected must and dust of disuse, but a faint undercurrent of mildew and copper, like rotting flowers laid on forgotten graves. I was just passing dressing room 2 when I heard the soft click. It came from ahead. Room 3. The door had been shut earlier. I remembered distinctly, even noted it down during the first round. But now, it hung slightly open, as if something inside had changed its mind about being alone. The overhead light in the hallway flickered once, then steadied. I took a cautious step forward, not to breach the threshold, but to peer inside from the hallway. That was the first mistake. The second was looking too long. Inside, the dressing room mirror had fogged entirely, though there was no reason for it to. No heat, no breath, no life. And yet, strange handprints slid down the glass from the inside, as though someone trapped in the reflection were clawing to get out. On the far wall, a cracked vanity lamp flickered rhythmically. Something moved across the surface of the mirror. A figure, featureless at first, then slowly sharpening. A woman, her back turned, brushing long black hair with strokes. She wasn't there in the room, not physically, but the mirror showed her clearly. She paused mid-brush. Then, her head began to turn, rotating far too far, her neck distending unnaturally as her face came into view. Where her eyes should have been, two gaping voids stared back, hollow and infinite. Her mouth split open, too wide, revealing rows of teeth that seemed to pulse rather than rest. I stumbled back, my spine brushing the opposite wall, the air suddenly colder by several degrees. The dressing room door creaked open another inch. Inside, the woman's figure stood now, not just in the mirror, but in the room itself. And yet the real space remained empty. Only the mirror showed her. Only the mirror knew. My hand went to my belt flashlight, but I didn't dare use it. Somehow, I understood that shedding more light would only give her clarity, shape, power. Instead, I moved down the hallway, counted each dressing room aloud as I passed. 4, 5, 6, until the feeling began to lift, like the pressure receding from my chest. Back in the security room, I locked the door and watched the hallway camera on the monitor. Dressing room 3's door was now fully closed. I allowed myself a breath, just one, before the stage lights blinked on in the auditorium, flooding the empty house with harsh golden beams. My hands trembled. Rule 6 was next, and it required applause. The clock on the wall struck 3:12 a.m. with a soft mechanical tick, and at that very moment, the stage lights surged to life. It wasn't a gradual awakening, more like a blinding instant illumination. Harsh artificial beams slicing through the auditorium's darkness, like knives through silk. The light wasn't warm or welcoming. It was surgical, sterile, as if the stage had become an operating table awaiting a sacrifice. I remained frozen in the surveillance room for a heartbeat too long. The rules screamed at the edge of my mind, jostling for priority. I threw open the security door and rushed back into the theater, boots thudding against the marble as I descended the side aisle with a mixture of dread and urgency. Curtains hung like lifeless shrouds, unmoving, and yet the stage itself, bathed in that intense golden white light, looked occupied. Not by people, not exactly, by shapes. At first they were dim, like smudges against the brightness, standing center stage. Human in outline, but featureless. Each form a suggestion rather than a presence. I couldn't count them. Every time I blinked, more seemed to appear. A dozen, 2 dozen, a full cast maybe. I reached the front row, forced my hands to move and clapped. Once, twice. The sound felt too loud and brittle, like bones cracking in a tomb. The figures didn't move. They simply remained still in the light, facing out toward the empty audience. Waiting, watching, or perhaps listening. I continued to clap in a steady rhythm. My palms burned and arms ached. However, shapes stood motionless. Then the smallest sound, a single tap followed by another. A light, slow beat, like footsteps on wood. The figures began to sway, synchronized and measured, like a cast rehearsing a scene that only they remembered. An old play long since banned from living memory. I didn't dare stop. My hands were slick with sweat now, and my wrists screamed in protest, but I kept the rhythm going, louder, faster. From the wings, another figure emerged. This one, sharp and distinct. He wore a powdered wig and 18th century coat, deep crimson and gold, with tails that dragged like tendrils behind him. His face was painted white as porcelain, with hollow black circles around the eyes and rouge smeared wide across both cheeks. He took a theatrical bow. The figures behind him followed in silence. The lights flared one last time, an almost blinding surge that filled the entire auditorium. And then, everything went dark. I stood alone in front of the stage, the silence deafening in the absence of my applause. My hands were numb, my heart galloping like a terrified animal trapped in my chest. Behind me, something moved in the balcony. It was enough to make me leave the stage. 3:19 a.m. I had just returned to the lobby when I heard a soft sound. Paper, thin and wavering, like a silk thread pulled taut and then plucked. A high-pitched whimper that barely registered as human, yet rooted me where I stood. It was coming from the eastern corridor, where the old dressing rooms lined the walls like mausoleum slots in a catacomb. I didn't want to go, but I knew the rule. You may see a girl wearing a crying mask. Act out her favorite scene from a theater play with her. If she likes it, she will help you escape. My boots scuffed softly on the carpet as I made my way down the hallway, flashlights sweeping over faded show posters and forgotten headshots encased in dusty frames. The air grew colder with each step, as though I were descending into the pit beneath the stage instead of walking on level ground. The crying grew louder and closer. I turned the corner and there she stood. Her dress was gray now, though I imagined it had once been white, tattered at the hem and torn across the shoulders. She stood barefoot, ankles together like a child in trouble, yet there was nothing innocent in her posture. Her hands hung stiff at her sides, fingers twitching rhythmically, and the mask was tilted ever so slightly to the left, like she was listening. White porcelain, unnaturally smooth, a single black tear painted beneath one hollow eye. She turned her head to face me. Slowly, with all the jerky grace of a marionette tugged by unseen strings. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Then she took a step forward. My mind scrambled, searching for something, anything that could qualify as a scene. Although I was in a drama club in high school, the only play I could recall in this stressful situation was a monologue from Hamlet. I cleared my throat. To be or not to be? That is the question. The moment I began, she stopped moving. Her head tilted again, this time in the opposite direction. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Her shoulders relaxed, hands stopped twitching. Or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. She stepped forward, slowly, quietly, and then, without warning, sat cross-legged on the floor like a child watching a bedtime story. I kept going, reciting the speech with as much conviction as my shaking voice could muster. I wasn't acting, I was surviving. By the time I reached the end, and lose the name of action, she was only a foot away. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could feel them, burning into mine behind that porcelain facade. Her hand rose, palm open, and with one gentle, deliberate gesture, she pointed down the hallway toward the backstage stairwell. And then, without a sound, she walked backward into the shadows and vanished. I stood there in silence, sweat dripping down the back of my neck, unsure whether I'd passed a test or been marked for something worse. But I knew one thing. She had spared me for now. The theater was frozen with anticipation. I could feel it in the stillness that clung to every velvet seat and chipped banister, as if even the ghosts were waiting for something. The girl in the crying mask had vanished nearly 40 minutes ago, and since then, nothing had stirred. No whispers from the wings, no rustling from the balconies. Even the distant hum of the city outside seemed muffled, as though the Orpheum had sealed itself off from the world entirely. I remained in the main lobby, back pressed to the far wall where I could see the stage from a distance, but not clearly. The ornate proscenium arch loomed like a gaping mouth, its frayed red curtain limp and heavy. I dared not get closer. I dared not tempt the next rule. The hour weighed heavily on my chest, a ticking pressure that gnawed at the edge of thought. I glanced at my watch. 4:42 a.m. A soft breeze brushed past me, though no door had opened and no window stood ajar. It smelled faintly of sawdust and grease paint with a sour undercurrent, like rotting wood and forgotten perfume. Something shifted above. One of the chandeliers trembled, shedding dust that drifted in the air like ash. And then the piano started again. Soft at first, barely a whisper, then more insistent. The same three-note melody, played with trembling deliberation from the orchestra pit. A warning or a summons? I kept my eyes fixed on the marble floor tiles, counting the specks in the stone like they were lifelines. 4:44 a.m. The curtain began to rise. I didn't hear it, I felt it. The air shifted with a sudden heaviness, like the weight of 100 unseen eyes turning toward me at once. A creak from the stage, long and groaning, echoed through the theater, and I knew the velvet drape had lifted, revealing whatever waited behind it. I backed away slowly, eyes still trained on the floor, and every fiber of my being recoiled as a presence filled the room. Vast, unspoken, and ancient. I could feel it watching me, as though its gaze were a physical force, prying beneath skin and bone. I heard footsteps, not from the stage, from the aisles. Rows of seats groaned and creaked as something large, many somethings, moved through them. I could hear the heavy drag of limbs, the wet slap of bare feet on carpet, the quiet hiss of breath from dozens of unseen mouths. A low murmur rose from the theater, like an audience shifting before a climactic scene. Only it wasn't excitement, it was hunger. I turned slowly, eyes locked on the far exit at the end of the lobby. I had made it this far. I wasn't about to break now, but with every step I took away from the stage, the thing behind me grew more agitated. The chandeliers swayed again, and then 3 deliberate claps from somewhere deep in the audience. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. That was Rule 10. If the audience starts clapping, it's already too late. But there was no roar, no curtain call, no sudden end. Just silence after the 3rd clap. I stood there trembling, my vision swimming with panic and the effort of not looking back. Eventually, the presence withdrew reluctantly, like it was tasting the moment, savoring it. The air began to thin. The unseen audience retreated into shadow. The piano fell silent. And somewhere far behind me, the curtain lowered once more with a final rasping sigh. 4:49 a.m. Not much time left. Just one more rule, one last ritual before the dawn. And then, hopefully, I could leave. It was so close I could almost taste it. The metallic sting of dawn filtering faintly through the cracked windows above the mezzanine. A sliver of pale light crept across the patterned carpet like the finger of some silent god, marking the threshold between this haunted performance and the world outside. I stood frozen in the lobby, the last rule playing over and over in my head, like a final refrain I couldn't afford to forget. When the sun begins to rise, return the keys to the box office. Leave the building without turning around. Simple, clean, terrifying in its ambiguity. The keyring was still clipped to my belt, though the weight of it felt heavier now, almost reluctant to be let go. My legs ached, not from fatigue, but from tension. The kind of stress that coils around your spine and grips your knees like iron shackles. I hadn't sat down once since the shift began. I hadn't dared. The silence of the lobby was no longer reassuring. It was the kind that came after something had passed through. That brittle quiet where the walls seem to hold their breath, and the air still remembers a scream. I approached the box office slowly. Its cracked glass window reflected my haggard face. Skin pale, eyes sunken, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. I lifted the partition with shaking hands and reached into the drawer beneath the counter. I hesitated. Something wasn't right. The drawer was full of tickets, old playbills, a dusty flashlight long dead, but no key box. My pulse began to quicken. Then I saw it, behind the counter on the floor, tucked in the corner like someone had kicked it away in a panic. The small iron strongbox where the building's master keys were stored. I ducked behind the desk, reached for it and froze. A reflection in the box's metal surface, not mine. A figure behind me, standing motionless in the lobby, half shrouded by shadow, facing me. I forced my eyes to stay locked on the box, not the figure's reflection. I slowly opened the lid and placed the ring of keys inside. My fingers grazed cold metal, an icy sting, like touching something buried in snow. Done. The sun was rising. I could feel it, though no direct light touched the theater's interior. I stood, knees trembling, and began walking toward the front doors. The marble floor beneath my boots felt unstable, as though shifting subtly beneath each step. I kept my gaze forward, chin high, shoulders stiff. The doors loomed ahead, tall brass-handled things that promised salvation just beyond their threshold. Behind me, the sound of breathing, footsteps, and a soft dragging noise like cloth over stone. Something was following me. My body screamed to look back, to confirm what I felt. But I should have left the building without turning around. I walked faster, every step a negotiation with the fear threatening to buckle my spine. A whisper rose behind me, barely audible. My name, drawn out like a line of thread pulled through the lips of something no longer human. The doors were only feet away. Something sharp scraped across the marble. A presence loomed so close I could feel its breath on my neck, cold and reeking of mildew and iron. I could see my reflection in the brass door handles now, warped, wide-eyed, and just behind me, another tall, distorted shape. I reached for the handle. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Stay." I flung the door open and stepped into the morning light. I walked across the cracked pavement, down the chipped front steps, past the rusted ticket kiosk and out onto the sidewalk. Only when I was halfway down the block did I allow myself to glance back. No sign of what had followed me, no evidence of the horrors that had played out inside. Only the marquee, faded and crumbling, still bore the same words it had for years. Orpheum Theatre, closed for renovation. I should have gone home. I should have hailed the first cab I saw and let the sunrise burn away everything that clung to me from the Orpheum's bowels. But instead, I stood across the street, watching the facade of that theater like it might blink. The air had that post-storm stillness, heavy and tense, as if something was still waiting to exhale. Behind those walls, I had survived the whispering balcony, the shadowed figures backstage, the girl in the mask, the top-hatted man who'd asked for a ticket I never had. I'd followed every rule, kept to the letter and spirit, and escaped without turning around. But it didn't feel like it was over. I don't remember crossing the street. My limbs moved without instruction. The Orpheum's front doors, which I had locked with my own hands, was open. As if under a terrible hypnosis, I entered the theater again. Inside, the lobby was exactly as I'd left it, though something was different. At that moment I heard clapping. Rhythmic, methodical, synchronized, it came from the seats, the audience. No rule had ever felt more final. The clapping grew louder and stranger. Too many hands, too quickly, as if every seat in the house was filled, and all of them were waiting. I stepped cautiously into the darkened house, where rows of velvet chairs faced the long-closed curtain. They were full of figures, every single seat, half-formed silhouettes of something once human. Faces blurred, bodies slightly translucent, but arms raised in perfect rhythm. Their hands came together again and again with unnatural synchronicity. They clapped with neither joy nor malice, but with the dreadful inevitability of an executioner walking the steps, as if my performance was over and they were simply applauding the end. I finally broke free from the hypnotic shackles and took control of my body and mind, but it was already too late. One of the audience members tilted its head toward me, just enough to suggest awareness. A trickle of blood slid from the place where its mouth might have been. I backed away inch by inch, never turning my back on them, the way I hadn't turned my back on the theater hours before. Something moved near the stage. The curtain trembled, then began to rise, slowly and defiantly, though the time was long past 4:44 a.m. Behind the velvet, a silhouette stood in the center of the stage, taller than a man, broader, a face like a cracked porcelain, painted with an eternal grimace of pain. The moment the curtain reached its apex, it bowed, and the audience roared with new enthusiasm. Their clapping became thunderous, deafening, pounding like fists on a coffin lid. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I sprinted for the exit, the sound of applause chasing me like a physical force. My footsteps were lost beneath it, my thoughts drowned by it. When I reached the front doors, the entrance had vanished. In its place, another row of red velvet seats. The clapping echoed from every direction. Phantom palms in a rhythm that grew faster, wilder, as if demanding the final act. My breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of the building pressing down on me like a closing tomb. I stumbled through the velvet-laced corridors, twisting through the architecture that no longer obeyed logic or memory. Every turn brought me back to the stage, to the audience waiting with blind anticipation. They rose from their seats in synchronized movements. Their heads snapped toward the edge of the stage. There, just beyond the footlights, stood a little girl. Her white dress soaked with tears, porcelain crying mask cracked down one side. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, beckoning me with one delicate gloved hand. And though the theater groaned in protest, I followed. She led me through a side door behind the curtain, down narrow service corridors that hadn't existed minutes ago. Somewhere, the clapping faltered, confused, unbalanced. Something in the show had changed. We reached a narrow utility room. She stopped beneath a flickering light, then turned to face me. From behind the mask came a soft, breathless whisper. "Act now, but don't repeat yourself." It took me a moment to understand. She was waiting for the new scene. My mind raced, scrambled to remember the lines, the movements, and I performed. A soliloquy from The Tempest, spoken with shaking breath and trembling limbs. A monologue about broken spirits and escaping storms. She watched unmoving, and when I finished, she stepped forward and took my hand. The walls around us shook. From the theater above, something screamed. A ragged howling cry that shattered light bulbs and split the floorboards. But the girl didn't flinch. She guided me toward an unmarked service door. Behind us, something pounded the walls, scratching its way toward us. I could hear it snarling now, feel the cold breath of it behind my neck. We burst into the lobby. The stained glass windows glowed faintly with the first rays of morning. The air was clean, cold, and filled with silence. The clapping had stopped, the growling had faded, and the girl was gone. Only the faintest impression of small footsteps in the dust behind me. The sun was rising through the tall windows, painting the dust in gold. For a moment, I almost wept. The nightmare was over. I threw the keys on the box office desk again and stepped outside into the morning light. The city had never felt so loud, so alive. I walked for blocks, trying not to think. I wrote everything down. First in a report for the security company, then in a private document I kept locked on an old flash drive. I sent messages to journalists, to paranormal researchers, even to fringe forums on haunted architecture. No one believed. Publishers declined politely or not at all. Most didn't even read it. One editor replied, "If this is fiction, it needs a better ending." They thought it was an urban legend, a ghost story disguised as delusion. But I trust my eyes, and I know who saved me. Last night, while going over my notes, I heard something almost imperceptible. A single lonely clap from the far end of my apartment. When I went to investigate the source of the sound, I saw a yellowed theater ticket near the window. It had a small mask drawn on it and a single word underneath: "Return." I don't know how this ticket got into my apartment. I don't know what the girl is or what role she plays in all this. But she helped me once, and if she calls me back, I'll answer. The Orpheum Theatre demands an encore, and this time I'm ending the show.